Let's take you back to our top story. That is the postponement of the tabling of the budget speech. It's been moved to the 12th of March. Political analyst Prof Susan Booysen joins us now to share her views on everything that took place today. Good evening, Professor Susan. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Firstly, your take on that postponement of the budget speech. I mean, some say this is a necessary growing pain, while others say it's a bad signal.
Yes, it can really be any one of these. And today, as the news unfolded, one went through various impressions on it. First one was probably one of shock and recognition that the trust between these parties had probably reached quite a low for opposition parties to do this, and for the ANC to possibly think that changes like a relatively big and unexpectedly big increase in VAT can be really sneaked in. One cannot think of another term, but sneaked in. But, you know, if the ANC approaches this one constructively, if they are prepared to compromise better than what they had been prepared to compromise in the past, and go back to the negotiation table and make sure they concede to the public of South Africa, to the electorate of South Africa, and to these parties that they fully recognize that this is a multi-party government, and it is not necessarily, as the ANC's own narratives like to present, the ANC-led coalition government, GNU government, in ANC's words, that is implementing the ANC's election manifesto. So in a sense that it could force the parties, and especially the ANC, to come to terms with this multi-party character of the coalition government. That could, in a longer term, actually strengthen this government. But it's all going to depend on how the ANC reacts in the next few days. We've already heard from the opposition parties that they are ready to talk about alternative ways to fund it, other items probably to compromise on. So it is news that can go back to both ways.
Professor, some are saying this contestation of ideas is really part and parcel of a coalition, grand coalition or government of national unity, that this was to be expected. But if we're talking about this aspect of the 11th hour, 10 minutes to 2 o'clock, when you would have had the finance minister tabling that budget, that is when we heard, at least today, from the parliamentary speaker stating that that is when she was roped in, and the indication was brought to her attention that there could be a postponement of the budget speech. Now, that is quite confusing, that one would assume that if there was going to be possibly an intervention that includes VAT, it wouldn't have been something that was brought in at the 11th hour, meaning today earlier on, and then a speech was typed. This was most certainly something that was introduced maybe a week or 2 weeks ago. And something that we heard from the Patriotic Alliance's Gayton McKenzie was that, yes, actually they were seized with this matter for a good 2 weeks, if not more. So what could have changed at that moment? Because one would think that if it was typed already, perhaps there was some sort of an agreement that there would be an intervention of VAT.
Yes, there probably was, and probably at the level of about 1%. That seems to have been expected, but not at a level of 2%. And it was interesting to observe Minister Godongwana's media briefing just after these events, where he basically conceded, I don't know if that was inadvertently, but conceded that they had decided to bring it in at the last moment because they had expected the opposition parties to object against it. So, and I think that is really, should that really be so, that is a case of bad faith and really trying to spring a surprise on the coalition partners, and probably imagining that, as on a few other cases in the past where there have been differences on the Bela Act, to some extent on appropriation, on national health insurance, possibly imagining that there could be a light compromise, or even imagining that, given that it comes in at the last minute and objection at the last minute by the opposition parties and by the other partners in GNU, then would mean sabotage of presentation, not sabotage of the whole budget as such, but probably sabotage of presentation if that would not happen. So it seems by all circumstantial evidence that the ANC had imagined that this is what they want and this is what they can get if they use this half underhanded way to achieve that. And they've obviously been wrong on that.
You've indicated that, according to you, at the very least, trust is at a relatively low point now. We even heard the minister indicating that, at least from where he stands, he believes there were ministers that possibly leaked that VAT proposal to the media.
Yes, indeed. And that was part of my first reaction, that it's really indication that there's such low trust between the parties in this coalition government. And that is something that they will have to deal with. We know they're from really quite, if not very, divergent backgrounds. Some people say very ideologically opposed. In some respects they may be, but not altogether. But because they work with different constituencies, that mistrust is there, and they will have to find ways to address that. And it also speaks a lot about the way our coalition government is operated in South Africa, that it's always for all political parties, not just the opposition parties or the DA, not just the ANC, for all of these parties, it's a case of a contest for the next election. And that contest is being fought all the way. It has been fought from day one after the election results were announced.
A political party, pardon me for interjecting there, just in the interest of time, Professor, the DA is claiming this victory, and we've heard from other political parties that they were also strongly opposed to that 2% VAT increase. But nevertheless, the Democratic Alliance says that it would have only been the pressure from the DA that would have led to such a move where you see a postponement of a budget speech, basically saying that their opposition is inconsequential, they remain smaller parties, but really a party that would make any dent or lead to any meaningful change, such as a postponement, will always be the Democratic Alliance in that GNU. What do you make of just that sort of posture or tone for parties that are supposed to work together in this government of national unity?
Yes. I think a bit more gracefulness could really go down well in fostering new levels of trust in the coalition government, because definitely it strengthened this initiative to go against the budget. The fact that there was a range of political parties, that the smaller parties were prepared to go that route as well. That is possibly what the ANC had bargained on, that the smaller political parties may be swayed against the DA and back the ANC. That is always a possibility if the ANC gets one or two additional votes from other opposition parties that are not in the GNU, and they get to support all of the small ones in the GNU except the DA. They could possibly still manufacture a majority and win votes on that, although it could be very unstable and very contentious. So given, however, that the DA comes with big numbers, the fact that the DA swung against it meant that it would be very difficult to defeat. And that is probably the big wake-up call for the ANC moving ahead, that this type of situation is possible. Act in better faith.
Interesting times ahead. Professor, as always, thank you very much for your insights. That was political analyst Professor Susan Booysen there, just sharing her views post the postponement of the tabling of the budget speech today.